All right, friends, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure people will continue to trickle in. Hello and welcome to the session entitled Developing a Pact for Speaking and Writing Across the Curriculum. My name is Michael Todd, and I'm one of the Associate Directors for this year's IWAC conference. Before we begin, a few technical reminders. During presentations, please ensure that your mics are muted, particularly because we will be recording the sessions in speaker view. Recordings will be made available on the IWAC YouTube channel. And to ask any questions, please use the chat function below. You can insert your questions during the Q&A, and we will be monitoring those. And now I'm going to pass it over to the session chair, Laura Brady of West Virginia University, to introduce our panel and the speakers today. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, thank you for hosting this today. And I think everybody at Colorado State has done just a phenomenal job in pulling this off. So I appreciate that. We will be sharing our slides today. So I will periodically put those in the chat if you want to follow along that way. But first of all, just thank you for joining us today, no matter what time zone you're in. And it's wonderful to see the small pictures or names in the sidebar. And we hope that by the end of the session, we'll give you some useful ideas and that we'll hear some great ideas from you. So we'll take just a minute or two to do some brief introductions so that you know who we are as the speakers. We'll take another minute or two to give you some context, since we're all working at West Virginia University, to let you know how communication across the curriculum is working here for us. And then our presentation will be about a half hour total. We'll each take about 10 minutes to give brief overviews of different segments. And we are deliberately leaving a lot of time for discussion and question, and partly because on Zoom, I think that helps, doesn't it? We hope so. So Natalie, if you could shift to the next slide. As we start, if you wouldn't mind doing a brief introduction in the chat. Just who you are and a little something so we know who's here. That would be great. And we'll do some quick introductions to ourselves as you do that. So thanks, Dan, for starting us off. So just your name and where you're from, a little something about yourself. Thank you. Great. Coming from all over. Wonderful. And truly the international writing across the curriculum community. It's terrific. Thank you. Right. As you continue to do that. Hey, Terry. We're seeing some friends as well as new friends. So thank you. We'll wait just a second so you also can see who else is here. Okay, and then we'll tell you just a little bit about ourselves. So next slide, Natalie. Okay, I'm Laura Brady. I'm the director of SpeakWrite, which is the communication across the curriculum initiative within the Eberly College of Arts and Sciences at WVU. And in addition to coordinating SpeakWrite, we're
oh my gosh.
Natalie, we're going wild here with the slides. We will also put the link in the chat, just so if our things go nuts, we can you can find out where we are. I think we're on slide 3, just our brief speaking order. There we go. I'm a professor of English, but I also have the pleasure of working with colleagues across campus. And you'll understand maybe a little bit more about what I do and how the program works as we go on. So for now, Nathalie, if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, I'm Nathalie Singh-Corcoran, and I promise I can handle this responsibility of advancing. I direct the Huebert-Lima Writing Studio, which is our writing center and at West Virginia University, and I'm also a service professor there. Dana?
Thanks. I'm Dana Huebert-Lima, and I'm a teaching professor in the Department of Biology at West Virginia University, and I also direct our Honors College Experiential Learning Program. So I'll talk about both of those pieces near the end of the presentation. Laura, I think you're on mute.
Laura.
Okay, thank you. We'll each take about 10 minutes to give an overview of how we are using these 4 key questions. And PACT stands for Purpose, Audience, Conventions, and Trouble Spots. And so I will talk about it from the perspective of assignment design, Nathalie from the perspective of Writing Center, and Dana from the perspective of biology, STEM, maybe a little bit of the honors program as well. So as we go along, please type any observations or questions or comments in the chat, and we will try to keep track of that. First, a little context, and you'll see from our infographic there, those 4 key questions are sort of the trademark, the hallmark of the Speak Right program, the Writing and Speaking Across Curriculum program at WVU, specifically within the Huebert-Lima College of Arts and Sciences. The Huebert-Lima College is the largest college at our Research One University. We have about 29,000 students, about 22,000 of them undergraduates, as you'll see there. All 3 of us are faculty in the Huebert-Lima College, and in the last decade, there's been quite a lot of discussion about, just among the deans and in our program assessment meetings, about how we really do foster effective communication, especially among our undergraduates, but we've also been extending those conversations to the graduate level. Based on feedback from departmental assessment reports and follow-up conversations with folks associated with various programs across the curriculum, the college concluded that individual programs were actually doing quite a lot to encourage strong writing, speaking, multimedia skills. But one of the challenges was that we weren't doing it in a consistent way. And that made us realize that both students and faculty were not always seeing how maybe what they learned in English 101, our freshman comp course, might connect to a gen ed course in the sciences or courses in their major. So we were looking for a way to find consistency. So as a result, we put together a work group in about 2014, and that was me and the associate dean at the time, Joan Gorham. And we had representatives from the humanities, the social sciences, and the sciences. And our goal was to find some common language for talking about communication skills. And we wanted language that would accept disciplinary idiosyncrasies. So we wanted something fairly simple, easy to remember, and flexible. And we came up with PACT, a framework of 4 key questions, as I mentioned, that's become the trademark for Speak Right. And Speak Right really kicked off in 2015. We'll give you some examples today of how those questions have come to apply across a wide range of communication and learning contexts. So next slide, please, Nathalie. So as I said, we'll start by talking about faculty development and assignment design. Finding a common language for talking about communication skills was based on research about knowledge transfer and threshold concepts. And I know that many of you are familiar with the research and have, in fact, contributed to those conversations. So just very briefly, some of the touchstones for us are Meyer and Land's concept of threshold concepts as gateway ideas that provide a basis for fully understanding and participating in a discipline. And also work like that done by Linda Adler-Kasner and Elizabeth Wardle and others. In a study by Adler-Kasner, Majewski, and Koshnik, they've suggested that students, and I quote, "students need to engage in frequent practice with the concepts across courses rather than focusing on them in discrete instances." And it's precisely this idea of frequent practice. So next slide, please. that we want to take up in our application of the PACT framework of questions related to purpose, audience, conventions, and trouble spots. When the cross-disciplinary working group focused on how to help students develop and strengthen their communication skills across and beyond their courses, we started with the writing and speaking skills that students were already being introduced to in their general education composition classes. Next slide, please. Did we miss one? Natalie, is there one before that? With the, nope, sorry, I'm off. So with the challenge was to find ways that students could take, no, next one, thanks. Sorry about that. The challenge was to find ways that students could take what they were already learning and extend that knowledge in some new ways. As David Russell and Arturo Yanez put it, knowing how to shoot a basketball doesn't mean you know how to throw a baseball. So in a similar way, a student who knows how to write an effective literacy narrative or rhetorical analysis, two of the basic assignments in our English 101 class, that person doesn't necessarily know how to transfer those abilities into, say, a lab report. We all need to know the rules of the various games we play, and we all need practice, and sometimes we need explicit coaching. When we work with faculty to integrate PACT, we often ask them to think about how PACT might help students find the connections between prior knowledge and new concepts at critical transfer points. And for a good reference to critical transfer points, if you're not already familiar with the Elon statement on transfer, they've got a great graphic with those key points. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, and there's those critical transfer points. Next slide. Okay, we also want faculty to see connections between their courses and other courses that their students are taking across the disciplines. So we often start faculty development workshops by asking faculty to reflect on their own learning. We ask questions, and some of you may do this yourselves, and if not, you might want to think about these questions. How did you learn to write in your discipline? Did someone show you? Did you learn by observing, by asking questions, by trial and error, by some combination? And what purposes, audience, and conventions did you have to learn? And what helped or frustrated your process? What were the trouble spots, in other words? And then how often do you now pause to think about how you came to know something? So we want to emphasize that transfer is not just for our students, but it's for ourselves too. Next slide, please. We keep asking ourselves and our colleagues to think about whether certain assignments can help students learn not only the content in a specific course, but also larger habits of mind. That framework for post-secondary education, for instance, or this statement from Elon. So something else we ask faculty in our workshops to think about: can our assignments help students learn how to learn across courses and contexts? And does a common and recurring set of questions like PACT help? We hope it does. That's some data we're still gathering. Next slide, please. So building on teaching for transfer concepts, the PACT questions provide a recurring set of concepts and key terms, as well as a reflective framework, we hope, for thinking about communication. And specifically, the PACT framework emphasizes what Robertson and Tachik would call analysis of the situations for which rhetorical choices were made. Next slide, please. So I'm going to breeze very quickly through an example of an assignment design guide that we have on the SpeakWrite website, so you can go back to this at any time. But basically the principles are there on the screen. Tie the task to the goals, note the rhetorical aspects, because that's finally what PACT is doing. Break the task down into manageable steps and include evaluative criteria that might actually go back to PACT. And we'll go through this really quickly. So next slide. We always start with purpose. So why, as a faculty member, are your students doing an assignment? What are your goals? Next slide. On the assignment sheet, and we'll give you a sample of these in the handouts linked to this session, So you can, don't worry if you can't read this. Is it clear on the assignment sheet what your students should learn or be able to demonstrate? Next slide. Like I said, these are going to go fast. And the audience. What do your students need to know in order to do well on this project? So do they have a sense of audience? Do they have a sense of you and what your expectations are? And what about the audience for the project itself? Are they going to be writing to peers, to you, to others? Next slide, please. So in assignment design, does your assignment specify that audience or prompt students to define whom they're addressing? Peers, you, professionals in the field, a mix, because it shifts what mode, obviously, they might choose. Next slide, please. Most writing and speaking situations have at least a few established conventions. So in terms of your assignment, what format or genre are you expecting? How long should it be? How formal? Do your students need examples? Will you go over examples collectively? PACT can be useful as a reading guide as well. And that might be how it comes in as some explicit coaching. Next slide, please. Again, on the assignment sheet, is there any particular order students should use when compiling their work? For instance, is it conventional in your field to organize research by introduction, research, methods, and discussion? Would you like students to use headings? Do you want them to use any particular citation style? Do they know why they're using that style? Are there a few samples that you and your students could analyze together? Or could you ask them to find and analyze some samples on their own? So again, PACT can serve as a guide for reading analytically. And we'll give you some samples of the handouts in, you'll find those in the attachment for this session. Next slide, please. Finally, trouble spots. Where do students sometimes struggle with this project? So as you're putting an assignment together, if you've used the assignment before, can you anticipate some of their trouble spots? Or if it's a new assignment, might you talk it through with your students together? Can you suggest any resources that might help them? Perhaps you could point them to a library guide. You might send them to the writing studio at your school. Or you might remind them of your own office hours. Or perhaps something like the SpeakWrite website would be helpful. And we'll give you a link to that as well, because there are several different resources that we have there for both teachers and students. And next slide, please. As I mentioned quickly at the top, PACT might help faculty frame their evaluative criteria. So going back to those pedagogical goals, those basic principles. Next slide. And again, I know those were small. We'll give you a packet where you can look at them in actual readable style. There are, in other words, many ways to integrate PACT, and we brainstorm possibilities at faculty development sessions and workshops on assignment design. And we hope that you might do a little brainstorming with us in a few minutes as we finish running through our quick overviews. But before we do that, my colleague Nathalie Singh-Corcoran will describe how she uses PACT in tutor education, and then Dana Huebert-Lima will talk about PACT in the context of biology and STEM. So, Nathalie.
Okay, yep. So this is my walking and chewing gum moment. Let's see if let's see how I do. So so as Laura mentioned, I'll be discussing how I use PACT in tutor education. Before I talk about PACT specifically, I just want to give you a little bit of background, some context on how the tutors are oriented to Writing Center work at West Virginia University. So I teach a semester-long tutor education course for undergraduate students who are interested in becoming Writing Center tutors. We call our tutors consultants, but I'll go back and forth and say tutors and consultants. So during the semester, the students in that course complete a variety of assignments, and they include observations and tutor interviews. They complete several reflective writing assignments, and they also complete a final project. And it's in that final project that where PACT appears. And so that's what I'll be spending the next few minutes talking about. Okay, so in this final assignment, I ask the students to identify an unfamiliar academic genre. And by unfamiliar, I mean, I ask the students to find and examine a genre of academic writing that they have no experience in. So they've never taken a course in it. It's just not one that they've encountered. And I asked them to collect an assignment sheet, a student sample of that genre. I asked them to interview an instructor or even a professional about their experiences teaching and or using that academic genre. And then I asked my tutors to kind of write all of that up. Write everything that they learned about the genre and the discipline using a PACT framework. And then that sort of last piece is I asked them to do some application. So I asked them to create a resource about the genre that can be used perhaps during a tutoring session, could be used for promotional purposes, or could be used during a workshop, or for tutor education in the future. So why do I do this? If you are like me and you've been doing WAC work for a little while, then you've experienced kind of firsthand this assumption that many faculty who are new to WAC have regarding the kind of universal qualities of writing. You know, that sort of assumption that all writing is the same, and that what equals good writing in one discipline is the same as what equals good writing in another discipline. Well, this observation in our WAC work certainly plays out in the research, as folks like Wardle, Wolf, Olson, and Wilder, and others have shown. So writing tutors certainly, a faculty experience this phenomenon, so writing tutors do as well. So, and the research supports that kind of new writing tutors especially have this sort of general conception of writing. There's longstanding research that suggests generalist or non-expert tutors, and by generalist, I mean a tutor who is working with another student who is not in a discipline of their own. So it might be an English tutor working with a biology student, that these non-expert tutors are less successful at providing that kind of global feedback than discipline-specific tutors. So if I had a student who was a writing tutor who was a biology major working with another biology student, that biology tutor, writing tutor would give more sort of targeted feedback than somebody who was kind of a more generalist tutor. So that kind of difficulty arises because, again, those new tutors have that sort of generalized conception of writing. Writing is the same. Good writing is the same, regardless of kind of where or what a student is writing. So like a faculty, a tutor's own disciplinary bias and prior experience with writing directly informs the feedback that they give to all writers. Sometimes we can fall into some sticky situations, and the writing tutors give advice that's not quite accurate, right? Or not useful to the students. So this unfamiliar genre project is meant to combat the bias and to provide the new tutors with some disciplinary knowledge that will increase their effectiveness in providing feedback to writers. But it's also sort of meant to provide a kind of like aha moment for them, just that sort of awareness that writing is not the same across disciplines. So I adapted this assignment from Robinson and Hall's discipline and assignment specific tutoring tools. If you're not familiar with what a DAT is, or a discipline assignment tutoring tool is, it's a writing assignment resource, typically in the form of some kind of handout that's then distributed to students. But the handout is collaboratively created between the tutor and disciplinary faculty. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. So after the tutors collect the assignments, sample student writing, and interview faculty, I ask them to kind of look at everything that they gathered and write about it all through the lens of PACT. So I provide them the following critical questions, and I'm not going to read through them because I'll go over my 10 minutes. But you can see that they draw on the kind of overarching PACT questions, and then they drill down. So purpose, what do I want to happen as a result of this communication? So then the sub questions are, what's the goal or function of the academic genre? And where on the assignment sheet do you see purpose? Audience, who's reading, listening, or viewing. I ask them to think about primary and secondary audiences and their expectations. And then lastly, conventions. And I've got a whole set of questions on conventions. And this is that sort of point at which they really start to see, those kinds of genre differences, because purpose and audience. So a lot of times they're saying, well, the audience is the professor, or the audience is the folks in the field, but it's these disciplinary questions where they're really pretty illuminating. And so they start to see the kind of differences. So asking questions about how the genre is organized, what moves the writer should make, evidence, etc. So I know I'm sort of blowing through these, but I do also want to say that that in our series of handouts, you can find all of this information, including my assignment sheet. So, and then last, trouble spots, what could get in the way of the writer's goals, but then I asked them to sort of think about tutoring goals too. Okay, so I also have some examples, again, in the handouts, and I can, I'll save the link. I can put a link in the chat once I'm done sort of speaking, so you can kind of take a look at those. So the resources that I'm sharing with you are not the analyses themselves, but the product that the tutors created. So one is a resource for a student in the form of a handout, and then the other is a resource for a tutor. So you can kind of see how the students sort of set those up differently, and how they sort of framed the genre depending upon their own audiences. So this particular assignment has met several of the initial goals that I had hoped that it would, but there are also some challenges. So some of the goals that it hit, so the tutors in training definitely gain that genre awareness, and the sense that the way that they write in their own disciplines isn't the way that other folks write in other different disciplines. It also gives them kind of a broader sense of the function of writing, and it gets them thinking about sort of bigger questions, like even epistemological questions, like what counts as knowledge, which is not something that that undergraduates often have the opportunity to do. So, I mean, it really kind of sometimes like totally blows their minds. And also through that kind of interview process, interviewing faculty, they gain some insight on how assignments across disciplines are created, how intentional faculty really try to be in teaching students, these sort of very specific disciplinary ways of knowing. So while the assignment has merits, it's definitely not without challenges, especially during this past COVID year. So one kind of general challenge is sometimes some tutors need more guidance on genre selection. So I had one tutor who was interested in learning more about creative writing, the genre of creative writing and the discipline of creative writing and the short story in particular. But when she interviewed a faculty member, the person she interviewed talked more about craft, right? The craft of writing. And so, and not the genre itself. And so that left the tutor feeling a bit unanchored when it was time for her to put her research together and create a PACT resource. Another challenge and this was specifically related to COVID, was the gathering of student samples. So in a normal year, students typically approach their peers, the tutors approach their peers in their general education foundations courses. So in those Jeff courses, that's what we call them, there'll be students from all walks of the institution who they sit near and they chit chat with and they kind of come to know. And so, when we do this assignment, it's towards the end of the semester, they know those folks and they feel pretty comfortable asking if they can take a look at a sample of their writing. Well, this year, students were fairly isolated and insular and did not get to know their classmates at all. So when I suggested, or when I shared the assignment sheet with them and asked them to find student samples, there was some pushback. They said, I have no idea where to get this. So, but one thing that was pretty interesting was like, they had no problem like cold emailing faculty and saying like, can I talk to you? It was really kind of fascinating. But anyway, so because so few students were able to collect sample assignments, I made that portion of the assignment optional. So the next time that I teach this particular assignment, it's gone through a couple of iterations. I like this one the most, but there are some things that I may change. So I might ask students to submit a brief proposal where they indicate the discipline and the genre that they want to focus on, and then meet with them individually to provide some more targeted coaching. If I don't go that route, I certainly could limit the selection to a dozen or so disciplines or academic genres in the Speak Right program. And then in addition to supporting students who might otherwise experience that kind of choice overload, that move might lend to a closer relationship between disciplinary faculty and the writing studio. So I am happy to take your questions a little bit later on, and I'm interested in hearing about the kinds of things that you do to prepare your tutors to work with WAC students if you're a Writing Center person. But until then, I am going to turn things over to Dana.
Thank you. I'm Dana Huebert-Lima, and I'm happy to be here. In part, I agree with Terry's comment in the chat that PACT is genius. I drank the Kool-Aid at WVU very early around PACT, and I've started using it in all of the academic spaces where I work and in many non-academic spaces. It just really helps me organize my thinking when there are a lot of things to think about. And in the last year in particular, as I've had to decide things for my own family, even to be able to say, okay, but what is the goal here and who is going to be impacted by this work, right? And so when I think about it in my academic space, I am always thinking about PACT for transfer. How does this impact my biology students and how does it impact then my honor students? I'll talk about that project in a little bit. I'm going to start with how we transfer to our STEM discipline. Nathalie, if you'd move forward one slide. So our biology students are highly variable in their pre-college preparation, and we can't usually assume that they've already taken a composition course before they get to us. And so in that way, the transfer of PACT in particular sometimes work in reverse. We see them first, and then they get the more in-depth discussion and application of it in their English courses in a later semester. And I just want to say kind of importantly, we teach communication around data almost exclusively. So using specific kinds of data as evidence for the work. And that means we're thinking not just about how to communicate in words, but also in figures. And that is a place where our students have perhaps the greatest weakness, is not just in data analysis of other people's work, but in thinking about how you present data as a way of communicating and how you support that with your writing. So how your images support the writing and vice versa. We are a Speak Right certified department. Nathalie, if you'd flip forward one. And that means that our students meet the college requirement for communication within our major requirements. So our certification required that we have a departmental learning goal that specifically addresses and assesses communication. You'll see here that includes both professional and general science communication. So we're trying to prepare our students for both research careers, sure, but also we teach a lot of pre-health students who are going to go into clinical spaces, a lot of engineers who want to go into industry or biotech, environmental scientists who want to go into field work. They have a lot of different audiences in those spaces, and the conventions of that kind of communication evolved differently, even as they all think of themselves as biologists. Additionally, we expect that at least 50% of our courses courses that our students will take will have a strong communication requirement. Typically that's scaffolded or has an iterative review process. So that's part of what makes us SpeakRight certified. That will mean lab reports, probably in the early classes. We have very high enrolled 100 and 200 level classes. So we do almost all of our writing in the smaller lab sections taught by our graduate students. And then that scaffolds through our required curriculum into our capstone. And then our elective courses are probably actually less lab focused. Those tend to be more lecture or seminar classes where our students are doing things like lit reviews or even specific paper reviews, one paper at a time. How do we analyze this for whether it's good science and whether it's good communication? So I'm going to give a couple of examples of how we scaffold this through our own curriculum and how we might do PACT for writing in the discipline, but also kind of PACT for transfer within the courses that our students take as biologists. So like we're a general biology program. Our curriculum is mixed. I apologize if you hear screaming 3-year-olds in the background. So our curriculum is mixed in that it's really hierarchical at the start. Students take fixed classes in a fixed order, and then they come to a buffet style. So the neuroscience students take electives in that space, the ecologists take electives in that space. So at the start of our program, we often tell students, because they have such variable backgrounds, we tell them the PACT of the assignment in really concrete terms, and then ask them to meet that in their writing. So we're really giving them a lot of direction at the start. We don't give them a lot of freedom. I teach at the 200 level. I teach a 200 level cellular and molecular biology class. And at that point, we give them a little more freedom. So we kind of focus on two things. One, when we're thinking about lab reports, and I think this might come to a question that was asked in the chat earlier, we teach it by section. So the PACT of the abstract, I'm sorry, Natalie, I forgot to tell you, like, I'm moving ahead and I didn't tell you to move the slides forward. Yeah, right there, thank you. So the sections of our lab reports, the abstract has a different PACT than the methods, which has a different PACT from the results. And so we teach our students in that way. We analyze it section by section and say, who is really the audience for the results section, and how is that different from the audience of the introduction? Where are you the audience for this paper as an undergraduate student? Which part were they expecting you to read, and which part is actually probably not meant for you, and you're learning to be a professional that can read in that space as well? The other thing that we do at the 200 level is start giving them some compare and contrast. So if we're thinking about the lab report as one genre, we can think about the clinical case study as a different kind of space. We can think about the industry technical report as a different kind of writing that all biologists might have to do depending on their career goals. So we kind of diversify what we present them with and ask them to then meet the PACT of each of those different kind of styles. The example that I've given here and that's in the handouts comes from our lab manual for the 200 level course. So here I've just given the PACT of the abstract as an example, and then we assess students on how they meet the PACT of it for each section. Yeah, actually, Natalie, if you'd go back one to the one with the colored pictures on the bottom. Yeah, that one, thank you. So this example comes from a 300 level communications class that I teach. So as students move to the upper level courses, we give them more opportunities to apply the PACT framework. This example comes from an outreach activity. So this is a science communications class. Students are preparing to create outreach for the elementary schools locally. And so to prepare for that, we asked them to assess public outreach from somewhere else. In a different year, we would go up to Pittsburgh, we'd go to the Carnegie Science Museum and see how they do outreach in that space, what what conventions do they have available to them? What resources do they have available? How does that help them meet their goals for their audience? This year we did that online, but the premise was the same. How do, given the stated goal of this organization, given the audience that they're trying to reach, does this activity meet that goal for this audience? So they're really doing PACT for assessment in that way. But also, one of the things I found interesting is my students are so geared toward experiments and experimental design that they come to their communication in the same way. So they're thinking about, when they ask, what's the purpose of this activity, they're hypothesis testing. They're designing a hypothesis as scientists because they're attuned to think like that. And when they ask, does the purpose meet the audience, they're collecting data, right? How do we collect data about communication and think about this very experimentally? So the PACT for transfer is about communication, yes, but it's also converting to a way of thinking about science and scientific principles and experimental design in a totally different way. I'm going to flip forward one and give just one more example from biology. This comes from an upper level class where I asked students to write a lit review, hearkening back to the assignment that Laura presented. And here we really give them a lot of choices. So by now they should have seen PACT many times, both in the English required classes and in several of their biology classes. And so in a class where we'd like them to apply what they've learned, the content from class, to their own interests, we can invite them to say, okay, so who do you want to write for? Who is the audience that you want to communicate with? And what do you want to tell them? What can you assume that they already know? And where is the journal where this kind of work would be published? So in doing that, we're inviting them to figure out the conventions, right? The journals, even in the biological sciences, have vastly different citation styles, different word counts, different expectations about figures. So we send students to those websites and say, go and figure out the authentic way to do this. It is incredibly frustrating for them. And I feel a little bit bad about that, but not that bad because it's extremely frustrating for me, right? Anytime I want to write in a new journal, if I want to write, if I had a paper rejected and I'm reformatting it for a new space, I have to go back and figure out the conventions of every authentic space where I might want to do that writing. So we're giving them the smallest taste of what this might look like in their professional careers. And then asking them to tell us about it, right? Who did you choose as the audience for that? Is it neuroscientists or is it biochemists? What did you expect that they already knew before you came into this? And what did you want them to know at the end? What was your purpose? How are you going to get them there through your writing? I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about how we've implemented this in our Honors College program. The Honors College Excel program, that's experiential and community engaged learning, supports students who are doing long-term, that is 3 or 4 semesters of student-designed experiential learning. Student-designed is overstating it a little bit. Often, especially the biologists, are plugging into research that's already in progress. But we have many students, especially those who want to do community engaged or globally engaged work, who design projects largely from scratch. And so they apply to the program with this project in mind. It is usually half-baked. Lots of times it is 1/4 baked, right? They have a vision, but not really any sense of how they're going to carry it out. And so to give them some structure around that, we provide them with the PACT framework as a way of organizing thinking, not just organizing writing, but organizing thinking. Students join from all over campus, and many of them have very limited experience in writing authentically in their discipline. There's 2 reasons for that. One, Nathalie, Laura, and I are all in the Huebert-Lima College. The other colleges don't have SpeakWrite as a requirement of their college. And so they have a different writing requirement, but they aren't usually as detailed or frankly as deep as what Huebert-Lima College is doing. But also many of their projects are interdisciplinary. And so they're working outside their major discipline, which means they have to learn a whole new communication style sometimes. So we as instructors then can't focus on disciplinary conventions. We need to find the commonalities of the scholarship that our students are doing, and PACT provides a useful framework for this. Thanks, Natalie. So our students take 1 credit of project design at the start to take their half-baked ideas and turn it into a strategic plan that's going to guide their work for several semesters. And we use PACT to frame that whole project design class. So what is the purpose of the project that you are proposing? How do you define your purpose more narrowly with solid information literacy? How do you figure out where the gaps are in the field that you're in so that you can plug that hole, right? So that they can figure out what goals need to be met in their community or in their scholarship. Who is the audience for this work? And we talk about that with them as stakeholders. So I'm thinking in the PACT framework, I'm thinking about audience. We're saying to them, who benefits from this work that you're doing, and how do you frame your project with those people in mind? Who constrains your work? Is it a funding agency? Is it your one-on-one faculty mentor who says, nope, that's a great idea, but we're going to do it this way? Right? How do you think about all the people that are involved as you're designing a project? And then how do we think about conventions? So when we talk with students, we talk about methods, we talk about tools. Is there a particular sociological lens that you need? Is there a piece of equipment that is better for this project than another, a specific experimental design, a specific community that you have better access to? How do you make those decisions around what the conventions, how are you going to carry out the work? And then we ask them to think about trouble spots, the ones that they can see and perhaps preempt, and the ones that they can't see and the skills that they'll have to develop. One thing I will say about honor students is that they are really good at following a path. They're very good at checking boxes if you tell them what needs to be done. They are not that great at adaptability and figuring out how to fail gracefully and fail like creatively. And so the PACT framework invites them to think about what skills they're going to need when trouble spots arise that they couldn't have planned for. And COVID has given that to them in spades. So we have a short video that I can link in the chat if you'd like to see it, that talks more about PACT as a way of organizing thinking and not just communication. But I won't show it here just in the interest of time. I want to make sure we have time for discussion. So thanks for your attention. And I think we'll open it to questions, specific questions or discussion starters. Thanks a lot.
As you can tell, I've got the best colleagues in the world, and so West Virginia University is the place to be. We want to open this up just broadly. If you haven't already put a question in the chat, or if you don't want to unmute, we do have a shared doc, and you could also type your question there. But let's just kind of catch up on some of the questions that were posed. I think Jessica had a question about how does PACT promote process? And that was similar to one that Dan had asked earlier. So I don't know if you've had that question answered. Dana addressed it, I think, in a lot of different ways in the way she's doing it in biology. The only thing I would add is that PACT is also very useful as a reflective tool, because the idea is that the students are getting so familiar with this terminology that they just go back and we can say to them, so what was your purpose? Did you meet it? And so we integrate those simple reflective steps as they're turning in various drafts, as they're meeting in peer groups and so forth. So please just go ahead and unmute yourselves if you have questions. Others?
Sorry, I muted. There's a question for Dana. Oh, was I going to ask your question, Dan? You can go ahead and ask it.
Go ahead. Either way.
Oh, I'm just reading from the chat. So this is from Dan about, it's to you, Dana. So do biology faculty agree on what constitutes an effective lab report, lit review, paper analysis? I wonder if they can describe the observable features of the written products in the absence of an example.
And I'll admit that I don't necessarily know the answer to that because I'm sure we've never discussed it. So we have the undergrad faculty, we have a large cohort of teaching faculty who do a lot of the undergrad assessment, and we have done some assessment where we go back to capstone reports from 2 years ago and just kind of score them and say, did students were they better writers at capstone level than they were at the 100 level? I mean, of course they are, but it's good to have the data to show it, I suppose. Yeah. And in that place, we did some really rubriced evaluation of what might constitute good writing, but we were coming back to the PACT framework. Did the students meet the purpose of the introduction, where purpose here could be delineated by a handful of bullet points? A good introduction. The purpose of a good introduction is to introduce the topic, but also to provide the hypothesis or the framework for what's to follow, right? And so in that way, we have constructed some rubrics that are common within the department about what would constitute good writing. That said, there's a real divide, I think, between the teaching faculty who see many more students and the research faculty who are teaching in more niche spaces, right? A seminar about, so the neuroscience journal club. And then I think it's coming down to the assignment design and what faculty are telling students about their expectations.
I mean, one of the things that such conversations among faculty can do is help folks in the niche areas recognize the problem that Nathalie identified, right? That their perceptions of what counts as academic writing are probably dramatically overgeneralized based on a very specific set of experiences. So, they're used to using, CT scans as data or something like that. And the ways in which those data are communicated are maybe different from what somebody's doing if they're in, population biology. It's one of those things that, the dream version of the PACT conversation is that every time someone uses the word effective, you'll be able to say, these are the characteristics and features observable in a document that are effective, and do it without pointing to an example, right? Like, you can start with the example and say, wow, this person wrote a really kick-ass abstract. But from that, work backward and sort of generalize, what are the features that make it a kick-ass abstract? I think that's a conversation that's continues to be worth having. And if research faculty are not always as engaged, you can at least say to yourself, at least I'm in the Huebert-Lima College and I'm not over there in the wilderness, just blundering around blindly.
Right. I get to hang out with people like Laura and Nathalie who keep us kind of focused in this area. The other thing I'll say is that that kind of fuzziness around what might constitute good writing is unfortunately really authentic to the discipline. In the sense that what our students are going to be doing when they leave here is trying to meet incredibly vague expectations about what the peer reviewer wanted, and how they might get their work published in really any region, whether that's the clinical students or the the research students. And as much as it pains me, I think we're setting them up for that through our lack of organization. We're preparing them for the future where they'll have to follow convention guidelines that aren't actually that helpful in helping you figure out what the journal or what the reviewer is looking for in terms of how the work is communicated. It's a lot of trial and error, unfortunately.
Bethany, thank you for the comment. I agree with you, the way Dana finished up, that honor students don't often know how to fail and how to do so creatively or gracefully. And PACT can be a way to further that exploration of failure. And that's part of why when the working group came up with the framework, we really wanted that trouble spots. We wanted there to be a space, partly because we know that writing, speaking, multimedia, however you're communicating, it's an ongoing process. I'll also add, it's been interesting now that we're about 5 years since we have certified various programs across the Huebert-Lima College. We're now going back to those departments and asking them to recertify, and that's linking to assessment. And we had asked them to come up with a couple of basic goals and to check in yearly. That didn't always work so well. And so now at the 5-year point, we're asking the faculty to go back and reflect to say, did you just want the SpeakWrite certification, or are you really doing this in an integrated way? Are your students able to say, do they recognize PACT? Are they using it? Are you using it? And it's been mixed. There's still more work to be done. So it's not like we've found the magic that unlocks all the doors. I wish we had, but we're continuing to work on that. But our 3 strands are always visibility for faculty and students, assessment and faculty development. Other comments? That's a really interesting point, Dan. Dan's wondering if there's a relationship between the threshold concepts of a discipline, the central dogma, and the trouble spots of an assignment. That I'm going to keep thinking about.
I think it can be. So, I'm going to be doing a workshop on the first day of classes for a 300 level engineering course. The students in this course are, is it 200 level? I don't know, I have to check. So the students are writing these sort of technical reports for the first time. And what the students are have historically struggled with is tense, passive voice, sort of like when and how to use it. And so, I know that there's some arguments over sort of like passive and active voice in the sciences right now, but this professor seems pretty traditional, we'll say. And so one of the things that I'm hoping to do is sort of illuminate the sort of whys, right? So because what she's been doing in her feedback to students is just saying like you can't be using active voice here, you need to be using passive voice without the sort of why. What's the purpose of passive voice in the method section, for example, like what function does it serve? So I'm hoping that having that kind of conversation with the students eliminates that sort of trouble spot, Yep.
That's a good concrete example. One of the things that passive voice construction, right? It's one of those things that comes up and it feels like a quirk of a discipline, what does it matter? It doesn't change the meaning of the sentence to move the agent into the predicate, but, apparently that's something we have to do. That's a hoop we have to jump through. One of the things that I'm in the same way that I'm sort of thinking about how it is that faculty can express, where is it, what's a feature of writing that shows that a student gets it? Sometimes it's around those challenging threshold concepts, right? So that if the ones are that the biologists that we've worked with have identified central dogma, mitosis, meiosis, trying to remember, there are a couple other, like some simple natural selection ones, natural selection and mutation. Those are places where students really struggled with concept knowledge and, students seemed to get it or they didn't. And so we worked with them to develop writing assignments that asked them to get into that content in a way that students are negotiating with each other and sharing work with each other to try and explain these concepts and handle some of those specific misconceptions. And the faculty notice when students have a better conceptual understanding, a lot of their writing problems disappear, even problems at the sentence level, because they get it and they don't have to use all of their brain space trying to get their head around a really tricky bit.
Yeah, one of the things I think both Nathalie and Dan are alluding to is the evolution, right? That I think students don't always see. And I don't teach writing the way that you all do. And so I'm speaking out of turn here a little bit, but my own students think writing is one thing that they can learn how to do, right? As opposed to a culture that has evolved. And your example about passive voice is one space where there's a philosophical underpinning to passive voice that we are moving away from. How do we teach students for the writing of 20 years from now? And I think PACT does that, right? Because it gives them the framework that then they can constantly be reflecting over.
Go ahead. Did you want to say something? I can't see your, please.
Terry.
Oh, Terry, that's you. I can't tell it's you. Terry, you're far away.
Oh, hi, Nathalie. This is a comment rather than a question. And thank you. I love PACT. I think it's genius, as I said in the comments, and I've been familiar with it for a while. And to see it used in biology so well is just, really wonderful to see. When I was still directing WAC at George Mason, I worked very closely with the chair of biology. He, a male, was quite interested in writing, and we developed a writing guide together. But my experience, and I'm wondering if this is the same, is that because biology more and more is predominantly female in the field. I'm wondering if you see male colleagues working as closely with you on PACT, not just in biology, but in other STEM fields.
So what?
I guess that's a question.
Laura can answer it on the more general for the rest of the STEM fields. I can say in my own department, the answer is largely no. Partly, I think that's who has the interest and who's teaching those fundamental classes. So our department is heavily focused on teaching faculty, teaching our fundamental classes, and those are largely women. And so because we're doing the bulk of the writing teaching, we're also the ones more involved in the Speak Right framework. That said, I think right now our representative to the Speak Right task force is male, and Laura has more a broader perspective on that.
Yeah, that we're getting a mix, but I think Terry, you are pointing out to a gender difference, and that Dana alluded to, that many of the teaching faculty do tend to be women, and so that is just a reality. And I think it is perhaps though helpful in terms of people who are willing to take up PACT and who are really thinking about it in terms of their students and the connections back and forth. So it's an interesting gendered point. And thank you, Kimberly, for your comment. I agree that the exploration of failure is important. It illuminates steps that need to be scaffolded. It allows students to accept the possibility of failure in an area without failing the assignment in total. Yeah, thank you. I realize we are at time, so I don't want to cut this conversation completely short. We do have a shared Google Doc, so if you want to keep any conversation going there, I can share that that link that you are welcome to join in. You will also find it on our slides, so let me give you the slides once again. We so far have only been able to upload 3 documents to this session. We're going to see if we can upload a link to the slides so you'll have it there as well. But if you can't access those slides, just email any one of us. And you'll see if you go to the slides, there's just a couple of takeaway points, a couple of other questions we're thinking about. We would also encourage you to check out the Speak Right website, and that's just speakright.wvu, West Virginia University. .edu. Thank you so much for your time today. And it was lovely seeing you and having such a wonderful crowd and seeing a few familiar as well as new faces. Thank you.